Anyway, buenas and Hafaday, Congressman Bordallo. I want to thank you for meeting with us today. And there has been a lot of pressure, I know, that's being put on the legislature to pass a resolution to support H.R. 4402, and that this bill has caused division in our community and has made many of our people question the leadership of our island. Many of our constituents have called and written to me with concerns about the way in which H.R. 4402 was introduced without their consultation and with feelings that they were not being heard. I have been hesitant to support H.R. 4402 primarily because the community was not properly informed or consulted about this bill, and it preempted the release of the draft SEIS and continues to hinder the NEPA process. Instead of focusing on the SEIS, our community has been responding to H.R. 4402, which only deals with a small section of the overall scope of impacts described in SEIS. I fear that H.R. 44 has distracted our community away from reading the SEIS, which is troubling when you consider all the other areas of our island and will also be impacted by the buildup. The original landowners of Retidian, who lost the property as a result of eminent domain, have been trying to get their lands back for decades. They were told that the land was necessary for the wildlife refuge. This begs the question, why is it okay to allow the Navy control over this property, which threatens the viability of the refuge, and not the original caretakers of that land? H.R. 4402 is vague and poses an important question. Does it legalize the further endangerment of our native species? It is obvious that a surface danger zone would not be compatible with the efforts of a wildlife refuge, and more needs to be done to protect this valuable piece of property and the important historical, cultural, and natural resources it contains. And of course, I've asked my colleagues that if they themselves would like to say anything or to ask you any question, that this will be an opportunity. I want you to also know is that we've decided to make this an open meeting. We've had 2 legislations that were passed by this legislature by Speaker Ben Pangilinan, that executive meetings can happen to discuss whatever they want to take action, but all votes must be done publicly. And then another bill recently that was passed and introduced by Senator Tony Atta, which also says that all voting must take place publicly, and any kind of discussion that really involves H.R. 44, for example, H.R. 4402 is something that we feel should be an open public meeting, hence, of course, us having it here at the public hearing room. I want to thank you very much for coming and meeting with us here this afternoon. Senator?
Maybe I can speak. I've been actually very quiet about this whole build-up. When I was made aware of the fact that 4402 had been introduced, it upset me because this is something that should have been resolved by the federal departments before the SEIS was released. I understand that Fish and Wildlife refused to allow Department of Navy to do the 48-hour test sometime in either February or March. If it was that far back that you knew that Fish and Wildlife was not going to agree to allow even a 48-hour test, how much more 48 years if they wouldn't allow 48 hours? And I think it grossly unfair that we are now in the position of having to take sides. This reminds me of my days when I was at family court, where there was a dissolution in the family, and rather than the 2 adult parents working out a settlement as between themselves, grandma's now asking the kids whose side are you on? Are you on daddy's side? Are you on mommy's side? If you don't take mommy's side, then all of the aunties and uncles on mommy's side are going to be against you. And if you don't take daddy's side, daddy's brothers and sisters and their family are going to be against you. And it's just unfair to put us in that position. The federal government can and should have resolved this on its own. You know, it's not as if they were dealing with Vladimir Putin or Benjamin Netanyahu from a completely different country. It's a division within a department with a undersecretary or assistant secretary that far down, and they've completely put this off to a hold. You know, as I said to Captain Old yesterday, I cannot believe that a country that leaves marijuana on the Schedule I controlled substance but has decided to cover its eyes and tell the Attorney General not to enforce the prohibition of marijuana is unable to tell Department of Interior subdivision of Fish and Wildlife, you will agree and support the Department of the Navy in this. And as I mentioned to Captain Old yesterday too, I said, you know, this is the same country that knows everything that I put into my iPad because they're accumulating all the information. Every phone call I make, they have. And they can't tell the department, for the interest of national security, you will give them 48 hours and you will, as a department, comply. They needed to have you introduce legislation to force them to talk, and then when they don't want to talk, like families in dissolution, they don't want to go to counseling, all of a sudden it goes to this big divorce situation, and now all of us are having to take sides. It's unfair. And I told him yesterday, I said, if Fish and Wildlife is going to insist that it's not going to budge, and you're going to need legislation to do this, is this going to be the same thing that we had with Senator McCain and Senator Levin, that all of a sudden, if any of us jumps out in front of this, or we side with Fish and Wildlife, you're the one that killed the buildup because you took Fish and Wildlife side. It's not as if we took the side of the Ukrainians over the Russians, or the Russians over the Ukrainians. We're taking, these are federal agencies. That should have been resolved quietly in Washington before the SDIS went public. And as the speaker said, now we're busy chasing around 4402 when we should be reading the 1,400 pages and commenting. This is grossly unfair that we've been placed in this position. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and welcome, Congresswoman. You know, my position on the whole issue of the military buildup has been to participate in the process. During the initial draft environmental impact statements, I attended the hearings. When you called town meetings, I attended those town meetings. I think, did I get a perfect attendance, or did you? I think I just didn't get my certificate, but I knew I had perfect attendance at those hearings and was able to speak at those hearings, participate in the process, voice my opinions, submitted documents, submitted statements, even in this latest round with the expansion on the MIT and the MERC, which is all connected to the buildup. You'll see my official submission of statements. So I've been very open and transparent in this whole process. 4402, you'll find in the record exactly my statement and my testimony, so it shouldn't be a surprise to you in terms of what my position is. And it is that process that we should go and move through the process. And, you know, 4402, if you look at it, kind of truncates that process with regards to the buildup, with regards to the responsibilities of the federal agencies that wish to expand operations here on Guam, most specifically, of course, the Department of Defense and the Navy and the Marines. So now they are being offered, I guess, a back door to the process that they've all agreed to, which is to adhere to NEPA and to adhere to the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106. In truncating that process, it truncates the rights of the people of Guam to voice their opinion so that it would matter. We had over 10,000 comments submitted by the general public that articulated the position and the concerns of the community. And we were hoping, of course, to replicate that, if not increase it, during the whole DEIS process. But now, with 4402 and the fact that it may just negate the responsibilities of the Department of Defense with regards to adhering to both the National Historic Preservation Act and the NEPA process, it just kind of discourages the community of what are we going to say when we already know that there's an agreement that's been struck by our federal representative, our Congresswoman, the Navy, and Fish and Wildlife, that if you don't agree with this, then this is going to do it, so that this doesn't matter. So I think it's a little disheartening to the community and so forth. So I think that that's really the expressions that I wanted to convey, because those are the expressions I'm finding. And the other concern, of course, is that they're just members of this community in both our government and so forth that are starting to point fingers at individuals in the community with regards to this military process and attaching assertions to the motivations of anybody who is speaking up on these issues. And I think that's unfair. I probably deserve it, since I'm a public figure, but there are many members of our community who are not, who are just concerned citizens that are now being looked at and targeted, and that's a concern that they have, and I think that's a concern that we need to articulate to our federal representative in this respect. So just wanted to relay those thoughts and feelings. And as again, you want to know what my testimony is on 4402, I think I send it to you as well. So it's very open, it's out there with regards to my position and my thoughts on that matter. And once again, I will be participating in the open house meetings for the draft DIS and making my thoughts and comments known and public as well during this whole issue. So thank you very much, and Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and good afternoon, Congresswoman. Thank you for being here. This conversation kind of brings us back to when the decision was first made to relocate the 8,000 Marines from Okinawa to Guam. And when that decision was first made, you had several of us in the legislature bringing up some concerns, because as you're well aware, the military talked about building up their own water, wastewater, and power infrastructure inside the base. And we know that if the Navy is no longer a customer to GPA, it would have cost the ratepayers a shortfall of $29 million a year. And so the ratepayers would have had to absorb that impact. You know that the infrastructure could not allow for an increase in the population of what the first DIS called for, 60,000 to 80,000 people in a span of several years. And so when this first buildup was first talked about, you had former Governor Camacho publicly saying, we need to build up, come to Guam, come to Guam. Then you had former Senator Jesse Lujan and former Speaker Ampinco, two Republican members of the legislature, introduce resolutions talking about how this impact would impact the civilian community by about $2.4 billion worth of infrastructure needs. Then we talked about the impact to the hospital, the traffic. The Vice Speaker talked about the impact to healthcare as well as the mental health care. while those of us in the legislature were raising all of these concerns, there was a movement that we should have the build-up at all costs. And for those of us who raised concerns about what not only senators but also members of our community who raised those concerns, as Speaker Ben pointed out, were being seen as anti-patriotic, anti-United States, anti-military buildup. So it was really ripe for someone to make a local political issue of it. And so as these concerns evolved, and as the legislature passed the law to provide for a Guam First Commission, where governor is the chairman and you have members representing all of our community, with your goal as well to speak with one voice, so that that one voice can be the only voice resonating in the halls of Congress about how this approach should be. Then you had President Obama respond by saying he supports a one Guam build-up, where the civilian community will be built up along with the military community. Then you had Undersecretary Work come out and talk about the 4 pillars. These were all based on all of the concerns coming out of the local community, both Democrats and Republicans alike. But ma'am, in the last election, a few of us were targeted, the Democrats were targeted for being the reason for this build-up pause. When it took 2 Republican senators, Senator Tony Atta and Senator Frank Blas Jr., who went to Washington, D.C. to discover for themselves what was the reason for the build-up pause, and they reported that it was because DOD has yet to submit a master plan, and as he pointed out as well, there was the funding constraints in Congress. And so I think what we're trying to express to you is that your position with HR 4420 is something that no matter what the local community says, whether the local community is in favor or against it, that decision is already being pushed back by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We know that, you know that. So I think and the purpose of this meeting and your meeting with the Democratic Caucus is so that it can be open, it can be transparent, so that we don't get caught up in what the mayors got caught up in the other day, in having to have a rush meeting in private briefings, voting on a resolution to support the build-up, a resolution which, by the way, I'm hearing has not been drafted nor transmitted to you, but there's some other press report saying that the resolution was already drafted to you. And then you have the Republican caucus coming out and saying that the Republicans are in favor of the build-up. They're in support of your efforts with 4402. And a Republican senator issues a press release along with the resolution that was passed by this legislature past November, saying that, see, the Republicans support the build-up. But that resolution was voted on by all 15 members of the legislature, and support for it, including all the other resolutions that provided for this one Guam approach. And the irony about that resolution sponsored by Senator Yamashita, at the time, the public record will show, she introduced that resolution because she wasn't comfortable with the kind of information or lack of information that DOD was giving regarding this buildup. And so fast forward several months later, it seems like this is going down this road where it's a partisan issue, and our position all along, ma'am, has been that this buildup is greater than any one of us, greater than any one party on this island, greater than any one faction of this community, and that we should, as much as possible and to the extent possible, depoliticize this process. And that's the purpose of what we continue to reach out to you as a member of Congress representing all of the people of Guam, that we do as you say, that we depoliticize this build-up process in particular, that we also leverage some of the past historical injustices, because we will not get any other opportunity. And we thought we were going down this road. Then you have Governor Calvo, who seems to be the one putting all the pressure on these same groups of people, same factions of our community, demanding a resolution from the legislature. there were previous legislatures and previous resolutions, as Speaker Wampat pointed out, resolutions that were even voted on favorably by both Governor Calvo and Lieutenant Governor Tenorio when they were senators. And those resolutions have yet to be amended, have yet to be repealed. So, that's the position of this legislature and future legislatures unless those resolutions have been amended. So I appreciate you coming here and you explaining what it is exactly that you're looking for from the Democratic caucus that the Democratic caucus has not already provided in terms of support for the build-up, in terms of the approach to the build-up, in terms of being consistent with what President Obama himself said how this build-up should proceed. And so why is it that everybody else gets the luxury of saying that they support this build-up but not at all costs? But if several of us in the legislature say the same thing, all of a sudden it's ripe for a political issue. And that meeting where there was a report that Senator Levin and Senator McCain's staffers were harangued, if that meeting was in an open meeting, you would see that no one was harangued. Members of your staff were there and they've testified to the fact that no one was harangued. But in the last election, the buildup is paused because those U.S. senators were harangued. And so I thank you for hearing me express these concerns, and we don't want to go down this road because with all this opportunity comes these challenges, but we can work these things out. And just a final thought, Madam Speaker, if you recall, the GVB General Manager and Congresswoman, yeah. Just a final thought, Madam Speaker, I didn't know how much more time I had, but ma'am, yeah. The GVB is now expressing concern based on the DIS that if this bill were to proceed, that it might affect the Russian visa waiver, and so unless we get together as a community, unless we wait for the community to give us the guidance that we expect from them, doing those things prior to hearing from the community just creates the situation that we're in today. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Half a day, Madam Congresswoman, thank you for being here. And maybe just based on sharing some of the sentiments of my colleagues, maybe what I want to ask you is, based on HR 4402, how did we come to this? What was the premise of the introduction of 4402? Realizing that the Guam Wildlife Refuge here on Guam is a part of the federal jurisdiction right now. But I also want to share for you, when I saw you yesterday, I will submit I am a spouse of a veteran, a retired veteran today. I am a mother of a airman. I am the sister of a Air Force personnel, and I have lots of other family, nieces and nephews, and including my brother and sister-in-laws that are part of the military. But my take is, as I share some of the sentiments, maybe you can enlighten me, because it's like I really don't want to see ourselves pitting ourselves against each other, and maybe ask you the importance of or the impetus of how this came about. Maybe I can turn that over to you right now, Madam Speaker, if I may, if nobody else wants to say something, because
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, Congresswoman, for joining us today. I'm the freshman of the bunch. I'm the new kid on the block, and I really appreciate all the years of service that you have put in, and my senior colleagues have put in, because one of the things that I've come to realize in the short time that I've been here is that we can do a lot of good things, and then something comes up that makes people have questions and seek answers, and then all of a sudden, all those good things that we've done over the past 12 months that I've been here, or how many years you guys have been here, all of a sudden, all that can get put on pause, and all we're focusing on is what's in front of us right now. So I wanted to first start out by thanking you for the work that you've done for us in Congress so far. You brought in millions of dollars for our people over the time that I've been here, and we're looking forward to those benefits continuing to, millions more to come for sure. I mean, you got a lot of work cut out for you. And I also wanted to point out that as we here at the legislature are faced with this issue, we still have accomplished so much in the last 12 months here in the 32nd. We've doubled the veterans budget. We've worked out a pay increase for our government and Guam employees. Our law enforcement personnel have gotten their back pay. We're working on minimum wage. We're working on a lot of things for our people, and those are all good things that have all happened before this day. And so now here we are, and the military buildup is coming back into the spotlight, and I'm a little bothered that there are certain interest groups in the community who would like to shine the spotlight on certain senators here in the legislature to try and turn this whole dialogue into an opportunity to attack them, because we're here to serve the people, and when we have questions or when we have issues that we'd like to bring up and just discuss for the benefit of the people we serve, it's very unfortunate that there's immediately going to start being labeling and attacks going on, and the same goes for you and the work that you're trying to do. I mean, it must be very difficult trying to navigate not only the expectations of your people here at home, but having to sail that Galidi in the very rough waters of the U.S. Congress. It must be very challenging. And so when H.R. 4402 came out, the first thing that jumped out in my mind was I support the buildup. I also support war claims. I also support returning lands to our people. I also support a Philippine visa waiver. I also support a Chinese visa waiver. There are so many federal issues across the board that some of them intersect, but a lot of them are for the benefit of our people. And I think all of us here, to some degree, would support each of those issues as they would benefit our people. Of course, all of us would probably have a different idea of where the benefits would be versus where it becoming a detriment to our people. But that's the way democracy works. We figure out where the proper middle road is as we come together for our people. But for me, the introduction of the resolution kind of overrepresented a single facet of the entire federal agenda that we have that concerns all of us. And as we move forward to try and navigate a buildup that's going to benefit Guam and also be rolled out in a way that's not going to cause too much hardship for the people, we don't want that. We don't want the other issues either to get lost in the whole conversation. Like, where do the claims of the landowners fall into all of this? Where do war claims fall into all of this? Where does the Chinese visa waiver and the Philippine visa waiver fall into all of this? Because in the end, we're seeing media and we're seeing a lot of federal officials going around pushing only for one side of the agenda. And I wish that we would get as much of a federal push for all of those other sides of the agenda. And I'm sure you wish the same. So as we move forward on the discussion of the buildup and try and find out where our people and where everybody will be comfortable with in realizing this is a benefit for our community, how are we going to get all those other issues the same amount of equally important attention? Because our people are, they're very patient, and especially for those landowners who, when I was following along, learning the history of it, how the Department of Fish and Wildlife said you can't use that land because we need it, and now all of a sudden, it's not so much of a big deal when the Navy probably needs it, And then for our people who were patient and understanding back then, for them to have to all of a sudden look at that, and it's like, why are we being treated that way? Why are we not being equally considered? Why is our claim being considered of lesser importance than the claims of the Navy for what they need to accomplish, or the claims of the military? I'm sorry. And so, and then as my colleague shared, it becomes very disheartening when our very patriotic and our people on this island who've lost sons and daughters to wars of the United States, when certain interest groups would now try and make them out to look like they are anti-American, or that they don't have any respect for the history of the relationship with the people of Guam and the United States. And that's not true, you know? And our people are good people. And we all want what's best for Guam. And we don't want to cause any harm to our island, to our future, or to our relationships that are mutually beneficial for all of us. But when we have all of these other federal issues on the table, why are we now only focusing on one? And how are we going to make sure that all of these other issues aren't just going to continuously get put on the back burner as we try to move this one piece of the puzzle forward? And I know it's a very hard question, because your job is basically to try and make sure that all of that gets attention. But sometimes what the other guy on the other side of the table wants to pay attention to isn't necessarily everything that you're putting on the table, you know. It's like a fiesta where all they want to do is hit the caliguan, but they don't want to touch the red rice or the gulay apansuni. So, you know, how do we get them all to put a little bit on their plate, you know? Because in the end, a fiesta plate's always best when it has all the flavors there. You know, that's kind of what we want. We want to make sure happens for Guam. So if you can help us to understand that, and also maybe give us guidance as a legislature. Maybe you can give us guidance. How should we approach this? Should we say, you know, do you really recommend that HR 4402, in line with all those other issues that we have here, moving that forward as a single piece is going to help move all those other issues forward? You know, or you know, is a legislative resolution really what we need to be doing at this time because we've done several resolutions already in the past? Or do we just need to go back to the resolutions that we've already passed and just kind of reiterate that the legislature's made its position clear? You know, I think we would like some guidance, you know, especially being of the same party, it would be appreciated. Thank you, Congresswoman.
Thank you, and thank you for taking the time to come and join us here today. I think all the important points have been made by my colleagues, but there are 2 points that I particularly want to convey. First of all, I really am disturbed by the message, I think, that HR 4402 conveys, at least in my reading. In my reading, and I think it's really pretty much pointed out by Senator Pangilinan, is that 4402 basically concludes already where that firing range is going to be. And so then it really kind of short circuits the process. You know, we're starting this Saturday, we're going to have this public hearings, the open house and whatnot, so that the people can come out and voice their opinions and whatnot. But you know, regardless of the 3 public hearings that we're going to have, and regardless of whatever the people are going to voice, the fact is, it seems that, you know, the northwest field is where the firing range is going to be, regardless of what anybody else may have to say. The second part, and it's really more, I think, personal, because the after 4402 was introduced, the people who was actually impacted, I mean, right in their own backyards, the Retidian families and the Hinapsan families were not even at least given, say, oh, by the way, you know, 4402, they had to read about it in the paper. And you know, despite the fact that there was that meeting that was held after the bill was introduced, there was the reception that was held, you know, it's kind of like, man, you poked me in the eye. And that can be taken in a larger context, I believe. So, you know, I think that's it's really unfortunate that had happened, but more importantly at this point is I'm concerned that by the introduction of 4402, it's conveying the message that, you know, we can have all these public hearings. That's just a must do, and let's get it out of the way. But already the decision's actually been made. So that's just what I wanted to convey, and I do thank you for coming and all your efforts. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I've listened carefully to everyone, and first of all, I just want to make it very clear that I think the biggest problem here is the issue of 4402, and why was it rushed in and why weren't we? And I'm going to get to that in a few minutes, but I want you to know that I made every effort to meet with you. And telecoms we had this meeting. Actually, I wrote to the speaker to request for this meeting today because the minority, I had a meeting with them this afternoon. I've had 3 meetings with the landowners, and I want to make it very clear that I don't have priorities. You know, people think, well, she's all for the military buildup. In all my service in the community, as a senator, as a lieutenant governor, first lady, you know, but I wasn't introducing bills at that time. But I've always said that anybody that comes to my office to see me about anything, whether it's health issues, education issues, military buildup, whatever, and I see it as a challenge and it's good for Guam, I will follow through. I don't have certain priorities. Never have been. So, and I made every effort. I can't help but think of my late husband, Ricky. He always said, people of Guam, always take care of the people of Guam. And that I've done. At the request of the speaker here, I withdrew 4402. That was your request, Judy, you wrote to me. And so I'm here on a listening tour. And I postponed it because I came out here and I wanted to hear from everybody. And I've done my very best. I met with the governor. I met with the legislature. I met with mayors. We're having lunch, in fact, tomorrow, the mayors. I met with various individuals on this island. So it's not that I have, left anybody behind. You are members of my party. And I think a great deal of you. But on this issue and a lot of other issues that are before the U.S. Congress today, I need everybody on Guam. I can't just go in and say, this party supports me, that party doesn't. I'll never get anywhere. In fact, in Congress, I play a bipartisan role, to tell you the truth. I have to. We've only got 1 seat, folks, and the territories are not that all important to members of Congress. And everybody that's ever had any dealings with Congress knows that. You have to work 3-4 times harder than anybody else. And so I just want it understood that I'm not here. Some of the suggestions here was that, I'm just for this or I'm for that. That is not true. And it never will be. And I'm a Democrat and I'm proud of it. But in a case like this, in a military buildup, you mentioned them all, the visa waiver, the war claims, I need the entire island. I can't go just running with one group or the other. So I withdrew the bill from Resources and Armed Services, the NDAA, to come out here on a listening tour. And there's going to be public hearings and so forth and so on. So I'm going to be there, and I'm sure you will be too. So I just want to lay the foundation on this. Now, Speaker, I would like, if I could, one of the questions that everyone asked is, why was the rush on 4402? Why was this done? So forth. There's only 1 or 2 people in my office that can answer that, because as a Congresswoman, I don't sit in with committee staff. I don't know what all the ramifications are. Mr. Herman is my legislative director. He meets with the military practically every single day, every hour. He knows why these things happen, what was the reason for it, and I think we profusely apologized for not trying to inform the people of Guam in a quicker situation. But we were on time constraints in Washington. And so if you would give me permission, I would like for, if you don't mind, Madam Speaker, to have Mr. Herman and Mr. John Witt explain why this came out like it did. It's very complicated.
I know you say you withdrew it based upon the community input and the voices that you heard, but in the next day we heard another statement from your office saying you really didn't withdraw it. It was a procedural problem, and that you'll revive it when you have the opportunity.
It can be revived. It can be revived, but I did withdraw it.
And that you will do so when the opportunity presents itself?
Well, I don't know that I said that. Mr. Congressman, but, so if I could, please.
And maybe another clarification. If memory serves me right, the press release on withdrawing the bill also stated that there were Republican members of the committee that had objections to it.
Yes, I think.
And
yes.
I want that clear because it looks like it was only her that asked for it. And I really do think that the people who
Oh, you
want
mean a
me-
letter to withdraw it? No, I only from the speakers. The only one.
But the withdrawal, at least in the press release, and I'll find it if you want me and I'll read it.
It's not necessary.
But I want the people,
Yeah.
it to be clear to the people that this was done because you admitted in your press release
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you had Republican members of your committee in the Resource Committee that had objection to the way that this thing was being handled. Was that
Because of
correct
some
or
of
not?
the additions that we made.
Then please, just make that
All right.
clear, because I don't want you to be blaming her by herself when there were Republican members that
Yeah.
also had objections to it.
Oh, no. In fact, Matt has mentioned that.
I understand, but today on the air, all you pointed to just her letter. You should be both very clear about the fact that it
The
was
first
both.
time I mentioned the speaker's letter is right now. I've never mentioned to any press.
Yeah, but when you mentioned that you withdrew it because she asked.
Well, I asked.
But you also need to be forthright and complete in your answer, and also say that there were Republican members of your committee that had objections to it.
Could I be given the permission for Mr. Herman? He knows who objected to it and so forth. No, this is not going to be long.
Explanation, because ultimately, just as we, the way we operate here as a legislature as well, that yes, our staff will work with technical individuals, but ultimately, of course, the goal has to come from you to introduce the legislation. It's not going to be your staff
No.
doing this without
Madam Speaker,
your
yes.
consent.
The Vice Speaker just asked for some explicit people who...
So
I don't
they
know
can
that.
be here and we'll ask them then the questions rather than giving us a long litany of, So whoever wants to, John or Herman.
Whoever knows names who objected to the...
But I think the most important question here that Senator Muñoz Barnes asked was, what was the impetus of having to introduce this legislation, and why at a time, which is just a day before the SEIS was released to the people?
The impetus was we were working with the Navy on the SEIS. And shortly before we came out to Guam, the Navy indicated that they were having a problem that may need a legislative fix. So they approached a Congresswoman about the legislative fix on the basis that if this legislative fix did not occur in the NDAA for 2015, which markup was what we were looking forward to, then it may put the record of decision on a delayed time frame. And it was explained to us that this does not in any way affect the SEIS process or the NEPA process. And you're right, they could not be specific about that until about the time the SEIS is ready to be rolled out, because they're conducting an executive function. They're meeting with executive agencies. They're doing their own executive reviews, and as you know from working with the federal government, they're very protective of that, especially to Congress. So when they had met with us near the time that the SEIS is to be rolled out, they indicated to us that there could be a problem, and they're trying to work it out with Fish and Wildlife, but as a placeholder, they may need language in the NDAA for 15 that could help overcome the legal impediment. And at the time we asked them about what the legal impediment was, they explained that the legal impediment has to do with an interpretation of the underlying Refuge Management Act as to whether or not the Fish and Wildlife Service has the authority to enter into a cooperative agreement, because such cooperative agreement might be contrary to their underlying RMA. So we asked them to provide the language, and they did. We held it under consideration, and we headed off to Guam. But we had to have it drafted up by Ledge Council so that it's ready for the NDAA consideration. And we thought we had more time. Well, the timeline got compressed on us because when leadership made the decision when they're going to put the NDAA on the floor, You back up the decisions to when the full committee markup will be, when the subcommittee markup will be, et cetera. And then, so we had the bill, the provision drafted as a bill and ready to go, held in abeyance. And the Congresswoman and I and Matt Herman were on Guam. While we were in Guam, we kept in contact with the DC staff and with the committee staff on the Armed Services Committee, knowing that we may or may not need this. We didn't know. But as we reached the end of our trip, one of the things that was requested was Nacion Chamorro requested to meet with the Congresswoman. And so we held that meeting. Well, we didn't know that Nacion Chamorro wanted to meet over retaining landowner issues. We thought they wanted to meet over self-determination issues. That was on a Saturday. The Friday night was the Friday in Guam, in DC was Saturday in Guam, and that's when the bill was dropped. The bill was dropped, it was ready to go, the Congresswoman agreed to do it, and it was only dropped when we realized that in order to meet everybody's timelines for the markups to get into the NDAA, then we would need to drop it and proceed with having the Natural Resource Committee have a hearing on it so they can meet their own markup schedule. The timeline got compressed. That's what we explained to the landowners. That's what we explained to the legislature in our teleconference meeting. The timeline got compressed. I thought when we were talking with the original landowners, so that's a Saturday. I hadn't checked my email since I left the office on Friday. I wish I did. I wish I would have known that Adam indicated that they needed to drop the bill based on the committee request. Okay, fine. And I wish we did talk to the landowners in a general way about the issue with the SDZ. But obviously, without the SEIs being rolled out, I don't think they quite understood the more comprehensive issue we were talking about. I think they understood that there was an issue between Navy and the refuge regarding the use of the land, but not the level of understanding that they have now that the SEIS has been rolled out. And when we got back, the SEIS was rolled out. It was rolled out in previews that week with the Congresswoman and the Governor and the legislature, and then the formal rollout to the rest of the community. So to put a short answer to your question, I wish we had better timing. I wish we had the benefit of better information, but we didn't. The Congresswoman thought she was doing what was necessary to keep the bill up on track, not to expedite it, not to delay it, to keep it on track, with the understanding that, and I appreciate the way you said it, Speaker, with great nuance. And Senator Panglin, seems like 4402 is the issue. It shouldn't be. The issue at hand is what's in front of us with regard to the preferred alternative. Now, if you've heard the Navy briefings, they continue to say that this has nothing to do with the NEPA process. The NEPA process is what it is, their responsibility to review the impact on our community, on the environment, on historical places, all those things, listen to community concerns. For them, this 4402 fixes an impediment. So you would question, well, if you didn't fix the impediment, what happens? Well, for them, the NEPA review comes to a conclusion anyway, and it comes to a conclusion with the community input. But for them, they may not be able to legally sign the record of decision because of the legal impediment. And the impediment is fundamentally having an SDZ over the refuge and incompatible use of the refuge. You couldn't get a straight answer from the Wildlife Service in the hearing. And so the chairman suggested they try to work it out. So to go back to one of the reasons the Congresswoman did not offer 4402 in the markup in the resources is because part of what she wanted was a review by the Secretary of the Interior to alternatives to the Retidian refuge. Meaning, and they wouldn't go with that. So that was part of the reason, given the tight timeline, and of course, getting the feedback from the speaker and from some of the other senators and from community feedback that this seems a bit rushed. Okay, there's more than one stop on this train line. So,
just interrupt because, we're kind of moving forward. Introducing this bill, you can resolve the issue of the underlying issue between Fish and Wildlife and the Navy after the NEPA process. What if the Navy comes back based on the public input and says, hey, folks, the people of Guam didn't want Pagat because it was historic and significant. They don't want Retidian because it's even more historic, documented, and on top of, the desecration of Chamorro history and settlements and artifacts and sites. We're going to impact Chamorro culture with regards to the Fanihi and the Marianas Crow, and the people of Guam don't want that. So if we can back away from Pagat because of the public input, we can back away from Retidian. Because again, remember, the Navy is in this whole process not because they figured that they listened to the public input. It changed their mind, but they're in this because they're under a lawsuit that says they did not meet their requirement of NEPA, which was to examine all viable alternatives. So you didn't need to do this to resolve that issue ahead of time and take the military off the hook with regards to this issue. That's my perception of this whole process.
Could I respond to that?
Sure.
I wish the Democrats ran Congress, because the 113th Congress and the Congress previous are notorious for failing to pass legislation. Important legislation, very important legislation. They even shut down the government. There is little chance that a standalone bill would make it through the process. Okay, so again, the record of decision is scheduled for March 2015. The legislation that Congress always manages to get passed is the National Defense Authorization Act for every year. And for 50 straight years, they've managed to pass it, generally in December. If this were not in the bill for December, it would take another full year to get into another NDAA. And meaning not just one full year calendar-wise, it would take 2 funding cycles away from us. And if we miss 2 funding cycles, it means that the buildup suffers a 2-year delay. Yes, albeit
You're getting money released right now for the build-up without this.
yes, there's a lot of money on the
Thank
table.
you for that.
And there's future funding, and there's funding directly tied to this. But I don't want to make the Navy's case for them. I think that you guys should have your separate briefing and ask those questions, and the community should attend the SEIs. But I wanted to answer your question. From my perspective, and it's a personal perspective, if not the NDAA, it's extraordinarily hard to do it on any other standalone or any other legislation. It's really the NDAA. In fact, that's how we tried to move Guam War claims on the NDAA a couple of years. And if not this NDAA, we are looking at an NDAA a full year away. And I don't want to make the argument for the delay, or the not delay, or the supposed delay. I think you should ask the Navy those questions. But from our perspective, as a placeholder, and the Speaker and some other senators ask questions about placeholder. There's 2 meanings for placeholder. One is keep it in the bill. If we need the provision, it's there. The second is the actual language, and this is common even for you guys. You would introduce a bill with language knowing it's going to have to be perfected and worked out and all that. So there's 2 meanings. One is the language itself, as introduced, needed to be worked out, and now there's another version of it that Fish and Wildlife agrees with. And then the whole idea of putting a provision that could be withdrawn in conference if it wasn't needed, or could be perfected in conference if it was still needed. And that's where we are.
Okay, and thank you for that. But somehow I just think that we're being taken for a ride here, because there are other things here that we were able to find. And I'm going to give you a digest of the federal resource laws, of course, about U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And in 1966 Act, it says that the Secretary is authorized to permit by regulations the use of any area within the system provided, quote unquote, which is part of H.R. 4402, that such uses are compatible with the major purposes for which such areas were established. That means then, of course, and we all know, firing range and a refuge are not compatible. And in order to make it compatible, then you're going to have to introduce legislation to make that happen. And then another amendment that's in Public Law 94-223, this is the Congressional Act, is that it cannot be transferred or disposed of unless otherwise directed by acts of Congress. This H.R. 4402 will be an act of Congress. So in essence, then, what we're doing here is bypassing this whole process of, the NEPA process, and for us to concentrate all of our efforts to be able then, to respond to this and then deal with this. Because the other thing that the military has told us, JICPO has told us, is that the other thing that they want is cooperative agreements, for the transfer or disposal or exchange of acquired lands. And that again in itself is an H.R. 4402. And I just question, of course, that the motives behind all this, and it's very clear, and there's been so many amendments to the wildlife refuge, and I was only able to get a digest just to find the language that ties in with 4402 and why then this is being done. I just can't, of course, wrap this around my head in terms of the timing, because regardless whether they're in Washington and you're here, none of our staff moves without us saying, file the bill, drop the bill. Nobody moves without us. And this bothers me because even my conversation 2 days ago with JICPO is that I don't know why you're all concentrating on 4402 or Retidian when you should also be thinking about the cantonment. And he's right, we shouldn't. We need to be concentrating on the SEIS. And to say then that this is not a real issue for the military right now, well, apparently it is. Because if JICPO is going to go into a private meeting with the mayors, closed door meeting with them, and even when some of the mayors ask for them to leave so that they can speak freely, they were denied. And so, you're telling me that this is not a real big issue for them when they themselves are already out there lobbying groups in our community. And that's what I'm saying. It's starting to cause us to pit ourselves amongst ourselves when we should be. And at least I've been very fair, and no one can accuse me of this because as an educator, I've been saying, everyone please read the SEIS. Formulate your questions and your concerns and go out there. I'm not saying take a position. I'm saying read it. Then I sent a letter the other day requesting at the request of our people, for an additional extension. And I spoke with Mr. Ludovici this morning, who made a courtesy call to my office, and the vice speaker was there. And I presented the letter to him to personally carry to the secretary, the undersecretary of Navy, or assistant secretary of the Navy, requesting for that. He didn't say yes and he didn't say no, but his long answer is that he has to put in a budget by March in the NDAA. So therefore, an extension, the way I heard it, and Vice Speaker, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we're going to have to move forward with this regardless, because I've got, like you said, that you've got to pass an NDAA, a National Defense Budget.
Again, Speaker, if I said that this is not a big issue for the Navy, I misspoke. Did I actually say it that way? But I think what I was trying to say is that the Navy has indicated they want to sign a record of decision by March to keep things on track, to keep the funding cycles on track. They generally transmit their budget with the President's budget in late February, early March. They want to be in that budget for fiscal 16. 15 and 16 are the critical budgets for us because they start to resume the funding and the removal of the restrictions that the Senate has placed. We're in a pretty good position for finally removing the restrictions. All the things that have happened in the past with regard to a new EIS and with regard to answering some of the outside evaluation which was done, and the last thing remaining was the master plan, which is going to be done now that there is an EIS. The two questions kept begging each other. How do we do a master plan when we don't have an SEIS that explains where we expect to put the laydown and the training ranges and all that? So whatever delays have been in the past, we're now at the point where a March ROD will either happen or not happen, And the Navy is leaning forward in the direction that they're going to be ready to do a March ROD based on an SEIS process on Guam that has enough time for community input and enough time for them to incorporate whatever modifications and mitigations they need to incorporate to be able to get to the place where they can do a March ROD. If 4402 is needed as we get closer to December, we will know it, because it was unclear in the hearing at Resources. It was unclear in their answers. They talked about how they're having cordial discussions, and they talked about whether they're not even sure at that point that the legal impediment can be overcome. The legal impediment interpretation is coming from Fish and Wildlife Service. The fact that they've agreed to language to modify 4402 is a good sign. It means that they see that they can do a cooperative agreement. But it still comes down to a legal question of whether an SDZ over a refuge is a compatible use. And 4402, if in fact the Northwest Training Range is the solution that is chosen, and if in fact the mitigations can meet the community's concerns, and if in fact all the other ifs are accomplished, then the ROD in March can go forward, and the 15 funding and the 16 funding can be on track, and then the buildup can be on track. If the buildup were not on track, there is a robust discussion you need to have as policymakers with JICPO, with the governor, because it's not for us to say what the dire consequences could be. It's up to the Navy to explain what their viewpoint is. And it's up to the rest of the community to listen and to understand that there are risks involved with not meeting a March ROD so that the 16 funding can be restored. I mean, you hear all kinds of things. Who knows? What we do know, what is fact, is that a March ROD may be jeopardized if 4402 is not in the NDAA this year. And that's the question at hand. And that's a question at hand that should not put anybody on the spot. That's a question at hand that is separate from all the other considerations of the SEIS. And as Senator Ada and some other senators have pointed out, is when you look at the proposals on the table for the firing range, PAGAT is we should say should be off the table, given all the issues that came up on PAGAT. The naval magazine ranges have serious problems associated with them, not the least of which is they require Gov Guam lands and some private lands, substantial private lands, and massive moving of earth in order to make them work. The least obtrusive one requires 253 acres of Gov Guam and private land. And that's without even overcoming the FAA concerns about the instrument flight paths. So those have serious issues. The one that still seems to be in some ways doable, but with lots of mitigation, would be Northwest Field. But we're kind of early on that. We have not yet had a single public hearing. So those should all go forward, and the community input should go forward, and questions that have arisen about historic preservation and access and conservation of wildlife and fauna, that all should go forward. The Congresswoman's efforts on 4402 are meant to be a placeholder in the NDAA, again realizing that if these all can come together and come together in a timely manner, and for many people, for many investors, for many people working on the buildup, there's a bit of frustration that it's not moving along better. And as you correctly point out, a lot of that has to do with the Senate. Well, we're at the point now where we can deal with the Senate restrictions, hopefully in this NDAA, get them to lift the restrictions. And you're right, there's about $1 billion of Japanese money waiting to be spent because of those restrictions. They've only let the projects loose one at a time. So we're reaching a point where the most important part, the EIS, can now come to a conclusion and have a ROD with the appropriate community input and mitigations and concerns. So the whole issue with Richitian, that needs to be worked out in terms of the mitigations.
And the only problem that I have with Fish and Wildlife, and we've all been around long enough with the discussions on this. It was only a few years ago when there was the satellite station that was going to be built up there, and Fish and Wildlife was concerned about the 29 bats that had a tree roost someplace there.
Senator, could I please speak to that?
Yes, and I'm just saying, yes, where 23 of them were killed.
Yeah.
So I know that Fish and Wildlife is willing to roll over if the Navy tells them to do it, or whichever military was the one that told them they had to put a satellite station up. All I'm saying is that we should be addressing the EIS. We should not be divided on trying to address this 4402. And this should not have been brought to us. Washington should have resolved this itself, not required her and you to have to come out and do a listening tour.
Senator, Chairman Fleming said that to them. Chairman Fleming actually said that to them in the hearing. Why are we even entertaining this? And so the frustration is mutual. But Senator Pangli might remember this. You worked with Governor Bordallo. He was approached more than once to list certain species under the Endangered Species Act to right to Fish and Wildlife, and he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't do it because he feared that the use of the ESA would invite Fish and Wildlife to come in, and there were unforeseen consequences. And he was right. Governor Arata is the one that did write to Department of the Interior to request species be listed, and the rest is history. They didn't just list species, they took Ritidian as part of the process of what they were doing. And that's what we're trying to undo. The Congresswoman has had good conversations with the original landowners. We've been frank with the legislature.
You should also have the record clear, John. That Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, where you say the bill was dropped on Friday, Washington, Saturday, Guam time, Senator Adler was too polite to say it, but you met with them on Sunday morning, and they weren't told that the bill had been dropped. There were families that you met with on Sunday morning. You had a picnic. Oh, yes. It was that
was
the Hinapsan families and the Ritidian families.
No, we met with Ritidians on Saturday. We met with Hinapsans on Sunday.
Yes,
Yeah.
but were they told?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I didn't tell Senator Arata. Senator, quite frankly, and I've apologized to you in private in that senator's hearing, I wish I would have checked my official email sometime Saturday morning. I didn't. I stayed at the hotel. I don't have access to my official email because it's security protected. I had to go to the office to check my official email, and I would have known that Adam sent an email saying because the committee requested it, the bill was dropped. It was dropped in the hopper.
I mean, I just wanted the record clear that you
Okay.
guys had an
Yes,
opportunity.
we were in Hampton
Sunday.
on Sunday. Yes, we were.
I didn't know about that.
Well, thank you for taking the fall for this anyway. But even further in the refuge public law, another public law, is Public Law 105-57. And what this does is that it gives, of course, the control or management of the refuge. It will be under the Secretary of the Interior. HR 44 now wants to give that to the Secretary of the Navy. In addition to that, the Act says that its main components, of course, includes a lot of stuff, but what's related to this now, of course, is a new process for determining compatible uses of the refuge, okay? And that's the whole issue. The legal impediment is that, is the firing range compatible with having a wildlife refuge? In addition to that, and one that's very important, it's going to be part of my testimony and when I put this in, is that environmental education and interpretation, when determined to be compatible, are considered legitimate and appropriate public uses of the refuge system. So it doesn't even say that, of course, that wildlife, a firing range is considered to be an appropriate use of the refuge system. And that a priority, of course, be given to general public uses of the refuge system. So, all these amendments to this act, speaks, of course, it makes it stronger in terms of what its main components are and their main mission are. But then this, again, HR 4402, takes all that away. And this is one clean sweep. Now, it's no longer with the interior, it's now, with the Navy. And it's no longer, and now whether it talks about it being compatible, we don't have to worry about that anymore because an act of Congress can change all that. And HR 4402, when it becomes law and definitely when it becomes part of NDAA and the likelihood, and it's a must, it's considered a must pass bill because you must pass a budget. So then this becomes like a rider to that bill. And the likelihood then of this actually passing is when it is in NDAA. So withdrawing it temporarily does not mean withdrawing it permanently, because anytime you can pull it out and make it an amendment, anytime you can pull it out, it becomes a rider. So it can happen anytime. And we may not even know until the NDAA is passed. And by that time, it's too late.
And on that note, Speaker, and I kind of wanted to put it into perspective of what's kind of like the impression the community is getting. Because the impression the community is getting is if we just pass a resolution here, we're going to green light this whole thing on the NDAA, as if the legislature has this immense power to turn on or turn off the buildup. And if that really were the case, could we then just pass a resolution also in the legislature to put war claims into the NDAA so that we can guarantee to get that too? And can we just pass a legislative resolution to put a Philippine visa waiver and a Chinese visa waiver and compact impact and all the land returns? If this legislature is really so powerful to be able to just pass a resolution to make all that happen, surely we can do all that too. But the impression that the community is being given right now is that if this legislature does not pass a resolution fully supporting this buildup, we're going to stop it. So then therefore, then it should be equally true that if we pass a resolution for all those other things, if we are that powerful, we should be able to drive all those things through as well. And so I just kind of want to put it out there into the community perspective that, for the picture to be painted that it's this legislature that's going to turn on or turn off this buildup is a big misconception. If we were that powerful, we would be able to get all those things done, and I think we would like to. And maybe you can help us to figure out how we can get all those other things onto the table, because if the NDAA really is the silver bullet to getting all those things done, then let's do it. Yeah. So, and these are all outstanding issues that our people all support, that you've been working very hard on, and you got our full support on all those things. I think that we'll definitely be there for you for all those things.
Well, the Congresswoman did do that. She did put war claims into the NDAA twice, and twice in the Senate it was stripped out. This is the time to say that. There are conservatives in the Republican Party, uber conservatives from very conservative states, who disagree with war claims on a philosophic basis. They throw up the obstacle of you got to find funding, and we did. They throw up whatever obstacles. But now it's been laid bare that there are 4, maybe 5 senators who continue to object to war claims, even with the funding mechanism that you guys allowed to go forward with Section 30 funding to call out the bluff. Well, the bluff is called. It's in a omnibus territories bill, and that is going to end up being stripped out of the bill because they just won't agree. But the Congressman did use the leverage of the NDAA to put war claims on the basis that it will help the build-up go forward. But whenever you put anything that's outside the jurisdiction of the Armed Services Committee, you have to get the acquiescence of the Committee of Jurisdiction. And for war claims, we did get the acquiescence of the Natural Resources Committee because it passed the House 5 times. So that was plenty of argument why the Resources Committee would let it go. So just to explain the procedural thing there, yes, we will use the NDA wherever we can if we can get past the Committee of Jurisdiction issue.
What about self-determination?
John, that's one of my concerns in this thing, is the use of the word placeholder. That's exactly how you sold this Section 30 issue on paying war claims with the money that the United States owes to the government of Guam under the Organic Act. It's not federal money. It's money owed to the government of Guam under the Organic Act. And it was a placeholder because when the time comes to pay it, that you would take out the Section 30 and you would get it in the budget of the president. But it's not, right? when it was presented, it was still that it would come out of Section 30.
Senator,
So-
the purpose of that was
But-
to show once and for all that when they claim it's a money issue, it's not. It's not a money issue.
I know, but
If
when you
there- if
tried
the
to,
money
but
issue
when you
were-
tried to move it forward and put it in there, you didn't strip it out. You didn't change the funding source.
Senator, again,
Again, so this
the Omnibus
issue-
Territories Bill was scored by the Congressional Budget Office as being budget neutral. It answered the budget question of conservatives. But there are two
Of course,
questions.
it's going to be budget neutral on the war claims because we're paying it with Guam funds, not federal funds.
Senator, the point was to show that conservative Republicans will never let this bill go.
I know,
No
but-
matter how many hoops we jump through.
But when you moved it forward, it wasn't a placeholder anymore. It was the bill. So this issue that this is a placeholder, that when it moves forward, it's not a placeholder. It's going to be the bill and the process. And so
It's a provision that could be withdrawn in conference if it was not needed. Or it could be amended in conference if it was needed to be amended. But if you want a March ROD, then this is going to be needed. Or it's going to be needed to pass as a standalone, and that's a nearly impossible task in this current Congress. The train that's moving is the NDAA 15 train. We know that train will reach a conclusion in December. So come December, if it's not needed, it can be withdrawn. If it's needed but amended in the first version of the 4402 and the version that Fish and Wildlife and Navy agreed to are two different versions. And maybe there'll be another round of versions. I don't know. But what I mean by placeholder is that it can be pulled if it's not needed, and it can stay in if it's needed in order to achieve a March ROD. If we don't have a March ROD, let JICPO tell you this to you directly. They need to carry that water. If we don't have a March ROD, let JICPO explain what it means to the Guam buildup budget and what it means to detractors. There are detractors to the Guam buildup. What it means to Senator McCain, what it means to others who do not really care to see the buildup go forward on Guam. There are detractors in the Senate who would use this as an opportunity to strip our funding, redirect our funding, and then at that point, the Marines have decisions to make.
the detractors are Republican senators,
That's right.
not Democratic senators in the Guam legislature.
That's right.
I was once told by one of these detractors that
I-
Guam just wants too much.
I would like a clarification, if I may, is that when this bill was, when you said you had set it aside, Mr. Ludovici was quoted, and I guess they didn't maybe use the entire sentence, because I asked him this morning, and because you said the exact same thing, you quoted him, that he basically in his testimony said that if we don't have the firing range in Guam, then there will be no military buildup. Then you said the exact same thing. No, wait a minute. And then you said the exact same thing. So I asked Mr. Ludovici to please explain what he meant. And he said that that's not the case, because he said that there are other alternatives that are listed there. So if Retidian is not the preferred choice when the rod comes out, then all the others would be. You're right. And I asked him to explain that, and he qualified it by saying no, that it's still going, all the other alternatives are still there. But to say that, of course, and to quote only that, and then more importantly for you, the Congresswoman, to say the exact same thing, because everyone started here again getting the perception, and they start to get scared that if we don't have the buildup, have the firing range, there won't be any buildup. So please explain that, because the alternatives are still there, and it doesn't say that it will not happen. It will happen because there are other alternatives.
I think that the Congresswoman has based hers on House Armed Services Committee oversight hearings, but for the past 2 years and this year, where she's asked the Marine Corps Commandant and she's asked other military officials, but specifically the Commandant and specifically the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, about the question of the range. And their answer has always been the Marines need to be able to train on Guam. And the firing range is critical to their decision to be able to go forward with putting Marines on Guam. And I don't know how I don't know beyond that how to, in any other way, slice that. I think that those statements stand on their own, and you would have to ask Mr. Ludovici, and you would have to ask other officials that are here. You would have to ask that yourself, because I don't think you get a clear answer on that other than to say the Marines continue to say they need a firing range. And without a firing range,
But
then it puts their vision of how the relocation would handle and how the training requirements for troops moving from Japan, it calls into question how they're going to be able to do training. And if they can't train, they can't come.
yes, John, but the live firing range complex on Guam is not consists of different weapons and so forth. And the biggest issue is the 50 caliber
Right.
weapons issue.
That's right.
So if you took out 50 caliber, you'd resolve a lot of the surface danger issue zones. You'd take out a lot of the contamination, and a lot of those issues get resolved. And the 50 caliber, if you read the record or the SCCIS, the 50 caliber I think is only 9% of the training that is fired. So to say that we're not, in this case, an alternative that could be considered by the Navy, which they did not, was what if you don't have a 50 caliber range on Guam and put it on Tinian? Then you could still have, I don't think so.
I don't know.
And
I really don't know.
you continue to train the Marines on 50 caliber in Okinawa.
That's right.
I mean,
So-
so you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Nobody's saying, at least I am not hearing that saying no firing range at all. There could be the small arms fire. We have firing ranges on Guam now. They have them now. The issue is if you take and resolve the 50 caliber issue, you'd resolve this entire issue of, I think, of the
And again, we cannot speak
of the
for the
firing.
planning on the exact planning of the SCIS. But I think that's one of the things, you're going to have opportunities to talk to Mr. Ludovici directly. So, you can bring it up and we'll bring it up.
And just to kind of wrap up things and close it, and of course, we thank you very much, but what,
ask a question.
okay, so it's just to basically emphasize and stress rather that, the introduction of 4402 derailed our focus on the SEIS. And I think it's really very important that, the dialogue continue, that our community has an opportunity to read and ask questions and share. And this, I hope you do, is that we are an oral, community, everything of our histories. We talk about these things, and when one says something, it gives you other ideas and questions to ask. And our people here are just feeling that they're not being listened, being heard, and that they're not being given the opportunity, because now they're focusing on HR 4402 when we really need to focus on the entire SEIS, which not only includes the Retidian, the surface danger zone, the cantonment as well, and many other alternatives that even Speaker Ben himself here has even provided that really could be acceptable, but no one knows about it.
I want to thank you, Speaker. I have an art competition at Cars Plus, but I want to thank you for listening to us, and I certainly am taking all your concerns very seriously. And like I said, I want to get together. I like consensus on anything, and if we can just air out all our problems, and I think they're willing to listen. I had a meeting with them this morning, and they seem to be looking forward to the community input. So, I need you. I need your support in whatever we go forward with, and I do thank you for this opportunity. Ben?
And before you leave, just real quickly, I know the Vice Speaker is very shy, and we do need consensus, and we do need your support as well. So I'm going to ask on his behalf, you could kind of give us, some kind of official statement and support for Bill 316.
What's 316?
that's the bill to raise the minimum wage, so that all the economic benefits of this military buildup can be paid to the workers as well. Oh, yes. Yeah. So we'd like to ask for your support for that as well. Okay, great. Maybe a letter to the Vice Speaker for the record. That would be nice.